So last week we left off with the cylinder head installation, but ran into a little bit of a problem there that I found out is really important. The oil metering jets that I mentioned in the top of the head. The rocker assembly, the whole cam is back out. I'm waiting for those parts to come. Someone on the single overhead cam 4 forums is selling me a pair. Really fortunate to find them because they're discontinued. But anyway, that's for another video. Today, we're going to put together the shifter mechanism that goes on the side of this CB750 engine. There's over 20 parts here, and like everything else in this engine, I didn't take it apart. So it's taken a little while to figure out exactly how it goes back together. So once we're done here today, you'll know how to put it all back together. Let's get started. There they are. There's all the parts that go right there on the engine. And they need to go on in a specific order. So here we go. The CB750 and other inline 4s, even a couple of 2s, other bikes from Honda, they all share a very similar shift mechanism. And it's right here. It's this shifter drum. I showed you that in an earlier video how it works. It's got some slots in it, and as you rotate it around, it moves the shift forks back and forth and moves the gears in and out of place depending on what gear you want to be in. In the bottom here is a neutral switch, and it's got a ball bearing on it with a spring. There's a dimple at one spot on this drum when it goes into neutral, and right now it's in neutral with this little notch pointing like that. So we'll set that in neutral to begin with. Now we're going to put the lay shaft bearing on. This is the retainer for it right here. It's got an oil gallery built into it. You can see the machine work here in the back, the casting I mean, and then it's machined out and then plugged up on each end. So the oil can come in here and flow out through here, and it lubricates these two shafts. So we need to put that on first. Before we do that, there's a small O-ring that goes right here. It's a, let's see, what is that thing? It's a 4.9 by 2.5 millimeter O-ring, and it goes right in that hole right there. We'll put the lay shaft bearing housing and bearing up in there next, and this little piece right here goes into that bearing, and we'll make sure that that O-ring doesn't slip out as we do this. Keep that in place. There we go. We're in place. This is held on by 4 M6 by 1 Phillips head bolts. I'm going to put just a little bit of blue Loctite on these just for a little insurance. I definitely don't want that loosening up at all. So a little bit of blue on each one. And we'll run those in until they bottom out with a screwdriver first. Now we're going to torque these down. I've got a Phillips bit from my impact driver. Put that in an 8mm socket. It's a 1/4 inch drive, so I have to go 1/4 to 3/8. I've got this set to 8 foot-pounds, just like all the other 6mm hardware. 8 foot-pounds should be enough. There we go. Next we have this pin that the gear shift spindle assembly spring catches on. That's going to go right here. A little bit of blue Loctite on that. We'll run that in, and we're going to torque that up. Now we'll torque that up to 18 foot-pounds. Okay. Now we get to some of the smaller parts. So let's get right close here. Now we've got this little plate right here. This goes right here, and this shift fork rod has a hole in it. That tab goes into that hole, and then this goes right there and lines up on that place where a 10mm stud goes in. Here's the stud that goes in there. It's a specially shaped little thing, so that's going to go right there. But first, a little bit of blue Loctite. Little blue Loctite. Let's put the plate up there. And we'll tighten this up. Next we have the stopper ring and the spring that goes with it. If you hold it like this, you see that there's an offset. That's where the spring sets in there. There's an offset to the spring. So when you've got it right, the spring should come down and line up right here with these places where it catches. And the way that goes is on the outside of those, like so. There's a pivot that goes in here. It's got a little collar on it. You can see right there, there's that collar. That goes in here, pushes in place just like that. Now we take this whole assembly, flip it around the other way. We're going to go over here on the barrel, put one end on first, wiggle it around a bit and get the whole thing over the barrel. We're going to line it up with this hole in the block right here, and we've got a 6mm bolt right here that we're going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on. We'll run that in there into the case. Here we go, 8 foot-pounds. That's that, and that should move freely. And you can see what's happening with the spring there. The spring now keeps this centered, springs it back each time. Next up, we put the stopper arm spring on, and it's going to go on this stud right here. We're going to put it on with the hook part that you see there pointing out away from the engine. Now we'll take the stopper arm with that little notch pointing toward the back of the engine. We're going to slide that on there, and we're going to get that caught underneath that little hook and also pushed on there far enough where it's actually on that collar of that first piece on the stud. Next we put the washer on. We've got a flat washer that goes on there. So let's push that in place all the way onto the stud. We'll put the washer on, hold that in place. Now we've got another little pivot collar here. That goes on with the small part pointing out away from the engine. That goes right there. Now we put the spring for the neutral stopper arm on with that smaller hook pointing out away from the engine, and we catch this other hook on that first plate that went on underneath all of this stuff. Now the neutral stopper arm goes on, and the notch faces toward the front of the engine like so, and then it has to come back here and catch right there in that little notch. Once that's on all the way, one more flat washer. Jumped off on me. And a lock washer. And finally the 6mm nut. A little bit of Loctite on there, just because. And we'll torque that nut to 8 foot-pounds. Now we'll just double check everything here. That moves okay. And that one moves okay. This is the gear shift spindle assembly. This is the thing that makes it shift when you push on the shift lever. We're going to put that on next. I've got a bunch of grease that I've smeared on the shaft right here. I want to get plenty of it in there. Give that a little bit of lube because it pivots right there. Now that we've got some lube in there, we're going to push this in there, but we're only going to push it in far enough where this spring catches on that first pin that we put in. We'll hold it there. We're going to move this arm up here above the shift drum. Now we're going to install the spring in here. That goes in right there on those two little tabs. Now we're going to push this down where it lines up between this part of the drum and this tab right here, and then just push it on the rest of the way. And that does the trick. Now we can get the shift lever on there and check everything out and make sure it works. Let's take a closer look at this whole assembly. I think you can see down in there, there are some dowel pins that poke out around here. As I rotate it around, you'll see them move past. That's first gear. There's second, third. Now see how this big washer looking thingy goes between those dowels, and that's what holds it in gear as it rotates around. Now let's move back over here and I'll show you how it shifts. On this mechanism right here, there's a couple of little teeth sticking out right there and right there. They catch on those metal dowels, and when I push down like this or up, it catches on one of the dowels and it rotates the shift drum around, which moves the fork to a different gear. So there's fifth gear, fourth, third, second, neutral, and first. Now, a couple of common things that can go wrong with these mechanisms: if you can't shift into gear at all, it's probably this spring right here, because without that, this just flops down and you're not doing anything. All you're doing is just moving the lever, you're not rotating the drum. If it doesn't want to stay in gear, it's probably the spring right here that actually holds this plate in place and retains that drum in that position and keeps it from moving. If that's not there, and this is flopping around, the drum is free to rotate around and it won't stay in gear. If it wants to jump out of neutral on you, this spring is probably broken. Or if it does all those things, it's possible that this stud has backed out a bit and maybe it's broken. So anyway, any shifting issues you have, always pull this cover off and look for that spring to possibly be laying down in the case. That's about it. So that's how it all works. That's about a wrap for this week. I've got more parts on the motorcycle than I do in boxes, and that's a bonus. Every time that happens, I am a happy man. This stuff, when I first saw it, I had no idea where it went. I had no idea how it went together, but after a bunch of research and looking at pictures online, finding a couple of little videos and piecing things together, I got it figured out. And now you've got a reference for how to put your shifter mechanism together. Next week we should be able to get the cylinder head finished up. I have the oil metering jets on the way. They should be here by then. We'll get those installed, we'll get the camshaft on, and get the camshaft timed. That'll wrap up the top end. So thanks for watching, thanks for all those donations, and until next time, me. We should be able to finish up the cylinder head and get the valve thingies, that thing, cam thing.